After a sort of false start with George Lazenby, Eon Productions really wanted to make sure that the next actor they chose for James Bond was up for the challenge, and Roger Moore, who at the time was riding high from the success of The Saint, was already a favorite to take on the role. To his credit, if ever there was going to be a film that would be a perfect indicator of his run in the role, Live and Let Die is definitely the one to start with. And it goes without saying, this is probably the most surreal film in the franchise. In the pre-credits scene, you can already tell this is not going to be the usual Cold War political espionage escapades. We're delving into the spiritual realm in all the ways you can in a James Bond movie. We've got voodoo sacrifice, alligators, and boat chases in the swamps of Louisiana, all contained in a finely crafted package. In this film, there's a foreign dignitary producing heroin on his island on a patch of land undisturbed by the locals for fear of reprisals from a voodoo witch doctor. The heroin then gets sold on the streets by that dignitary under the guise of a Harlem gangster. This setup is absolutely mental, and somehow this movie makes it work, even the parts which are kind of offensive by today's sensibilities. Now, on the surface, 95% of the black characters in this film are villains, and the lead actress is something of a damsel in distress. I suppose what encourages us to forgive this is that none of these characters are bog standard. And, as I said before, the villains are not your typical street thugs. They're organized and on an international scale. They're also dignified and dangerous. They all have distinctive personalities on multiple levels: Kananga, Whisper, Teehee, Baron Samedi. Beyond stereotypes, these characters have very strong personalities and a very strong presence, which really elevates the story. I mean, for example, potentially, Teehee could have been the standard henchman with a quirk. Instead, the script opts to give him witty banter with Bond and a dark sense of humor to go with the package. Then you have Solitaire. Now, I'm gonna say this. You'd have to be dead and blind not to be taken by Jane Seymour. She is simply hypnotic in her debut feature. Now, again, I admit, yes, she gets into danger a lot, and on a writing level, staking her powers on her virginity is a touch Old Testament, which kind of makes it uncomfortable. But that doesn't stop her being a fascinating character. Her history has a substantial air of tragedy. Though she luxuriates in Kananga's world, she is obviously a slave, and what's more, her mother before her was also a victim. Solitaire actually has an arc in this film. Many of her scenes are where a lot of the tension is. The best example is a scene where, after Solitaire loses her powers of foresight, Kananga threatens to dismember Bond if she fails to answer his question. There's an incredible level of tension in that scene. Even after its resolution, of course, joint credit has to go to Yaphet Kotto for his nuanced performance as well. But digressing, Solitaire may not be the idyllic personification of a strong female role model, but her depth combined with Jane Seymour's performance also helps. Upon further contemplation, it seems performance is the primary success of this whole movie. After all, if Roger Moore hadn't pulled it off, we wouldn't be here talking about all these other movies. We'll inevitably get into where Lazenby fell flat, but what worked with Moore was his confidence. You really felt he was comfortable in this role from the first day of filming, and if he wasn't, then more credit because he did a hell of a job hiding it. While Connery did imbue the role with a harder edge, Moore's trademark was his charm and his grace under fire, and for the stories his movies were telling, it was a perfect match, and Live and Let Die was an excellent start to a brave new era.